with that said, let me introduce my guest. He is a motivational speaker. He's also a marriage therapist, or at least a life coach, and his name is Mbogwa Mumbi. Karibu sana to the show.
Asante sana.
Good to have
Joyce,
you here.
thank you.
We want to talk about the power of soul ties. And the truth is, a lot of people, I think we've heard this phrase, but maybe they don't fully understand what we mean by a soul tie. So maybe you can go ahead and just define that for us.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm glad being here. If you look at the phrase soul tie, probably in the ritual sense of those two words, it's like tying, knitting, interweaving two souls together, joining. So soul ties refers to a bond, a very strong bond that exists between two people who've had a relationship that is just beyond physical. Where now the spiritual aspect of it is clearly evident, or the spiritual aspect of it. So it is that relationship or bonding between two persons in terms of relationship that is much, much deeper than just the physical aspects that we see.
How is a soul tie developed though? Because there's plenty of people who are in relationships,
Yes.
but I don't think everybody would claim that that person they're in a relationship with is their soul tie.
Interestingly, we seem to think that soul ties are only sexual. There are several ways through which soul ties can be created. For example, by birth, the fact that I have a father, a mother, or my close siblings, already we have soul ties. Or through intimate relationships developed over, for example, business relationships, entrepreneurship. If probably we have a business that we'll partner in, over time, our relationship may go beyond just the physical. It could also be vows that we make, but the deepest and probably the most everlasting soul ties are sexual ties, because these two spirits have a very, very deep connectivity, intimacy, and therefore they are likely to last longer and have more emotional power or attraction towards the parties involved.
And and I think generally, usually, I think most people who've heard of soul ties almost always hear it within that context of it being a sexual activity that has bonded two people together.
Yes.
But even with that, then it is usually with a negative connotation. Having a soul tie to someone is often perceived as a negative thing. I don't think I've ever heard anybody, say it's a soul tie and celebrate that they have a soul tie to someone, because we're always talking about breaking a soul tie so that someone can move on in their next relationship, or heal from a hurt from whatever relationship they had with someone. So maybe you can explain that further.
Thank you, Joyce. I am married, I have a family, I have a wife. Clearly we have soul ties between my wife and myself. This is not negative, it is positive. It helps us to become one. If you use a glue to put together these two pieces of paper, because we can use this to try and demonstrate what a soul tie is.
Okay.
The relationship between my wife and myself has been glued together. In fact, in that book, great book, they say the two become one. So it's not always that soul ties are negative, absolutely not. But of course, if the ties between the two parties are not helping them to grow or develop, or are not beneficial, then certainly they are negative. For example, if I'm married and I have a relationship with somebody else, and this is clearly not my wife, ultimately this relationship these soul ties rather may affect my marriage or relationship with my wife adversely. In fact, it's important, for example, for us to speak from the sexual perspective and say that every time you have sex with another person, you get married to them. You get strongly bonded to them. And if this is not going to be your marriage partner, it is most likely that over time this relationship may not be productive. It becomes very difficult at some point to try and break this relationship that you may not want to continue with at some point in your life. Because when the two are bonded together and the two become one, ultimately when you want to separate, what happens? You realize that parts of either of these two parts will be left on the other part.
Right.
It becomes very difficult to wholly separate the two. But of course, there are ways in which ultimately you can set yourself free of a soul tie that is not productive in your relationship with the other
Okay.
partner. Yes.
I want us to talk about how then people can set themselves free from that, because a lot of times, even on the show, we get questions along the lines of, I broke up with someone years ago. We were sexually active when we were together, but we broke up years ago. Now I'm married to someone else, but I'm still thinking about my ex. Or, every time my ex texts me, then suddenly, you feel confused about
Absolutely,
the state of your
Joyce.
relationship.
Absolutely.
So how does one fix that? How do you, because as you're saying, when you're with someone, yes, you're right, your parts of you are going to be left with that person,
Absolutely.
and parts of them will be left in you. So when that relationship doesn't work out and you're moving on, how do you clean up so that you don't have to carry, and imagine if you've been with 10 people, right? So you just have pieces of this person, that
That
person,
person.
and you're taking them into your new relationship. So how do you clean up so that you are as, I don't know what word to use, but let me just say, as ready, as presentable for your current relationship, this one that you want to stick to?
Okay. And the reason that probably I'm still feeling strongly about a person I even hate, or a person that we probably parted 10, 20 years ago, is because whereas probably we may have separated the physical aspect, the spiritual aspect is not separated as yet. The soul ties, the two souls are still joined together, because for example, if you had had a sexual relationship with this person, literally your spirits are now together. When we were in school, we used to do some practical part in chemistry called distillation. It's separating two miscible liquids that are totally, mixed up. So until and unless, by the way, you address the aspect of the spiritual connection, it would be very, very difficult for you to fully separate. But the beginning point is that, number one, every soul tie started with a physical relationship, greetings, items exchanged. And the first part is to try and do away with those items, honestly. For example, they bought you something, try to either return it or put it away from you entirely, so that they do not act as physical reminders of this relationship. If there is a spiritual relationship, trust me, then you need to have a spiritual approach to try and break it.
What do you mean by a spiritual relationship?
I know Christians who talk about deliverance, being prayed, so that you pray about the situation so that you delivered. But from a cultural perspective, especially in sexual relationships, there is a spiritual ceremony, and I'm sure almost every tribe has that ought to be performed for the separation of these two spirits, for the distillation of these two spirits. It may differ from one culture to another, but sometimes until that is done, you may realize, by the way, your mind keeps withering or diverting towards that person. And that is why, for example, you may have had a sexual relationship with somebody in college 20 years back, and you meet on the street 20 years later. Just by seeing them on the street, something in you is aroused, and trust me, you feel like you want to have sex with them again, even if you're married, and so on and so forth. So number one, for example, if it was just something that is you pained about, you need to forgive the past. You need to forgive that person, so that spiritually, that negativity that you've been, carrying on or holding in your life can be dissipated. If there are vows that you made, for example, vows like, I will never have another man, you're the only person, I'll always be there for you. Those are vows that also need to be recanted, because our words are also spiritual and they have life. So those are some of the ways through which you can be able to really separate yourself from these soul ties.
Interesting.
Yes.
The truth is, though, in today's day and age,
Yes.
sex is no longer something that people reserve for their spouses, like
Yeah.
within marriage. A lot of people are very open about moving around with different partners, sleeping around with different people. Some even like just to raise money for themselves. The sponsor culture has become very prevalent. So, this show has a lot of young viewers too. What would you say to them then, considering you're saying that a huge portion of soul ties are physical, and the sexual ones specifically are some of the most powerful unite us as far as soul ties are concerned. So what would you say to young people then, considering the culture in which we live in today?
In spite of our lifestyles today, we need to speak and say the truth. You see, the law of gravity will never change. If a baby perches up on the fifth floor of a building and they accidentally fall, notwithstanding their ignorance that they do not understand the law, the force of gravity, they will die. What you have stated is very, very true. And that is why, because choices have consequences, you can see the turmoil. You can see the misery that the world is going through, that families are going through, that young people are going through, as a result of breach of the truth. You have sex 1 year with 20 partners, you'll be confused, you'll be depressed, you may ultimately become insane, because these are different spirits that are trying to cohabitate in one building, one house called your body,
Yeah.
and they're very diverse.
But
so
you
the
know,
truth is this. The truth is this. Eh?
Yeah.
You can have as many partners as you want. You can have sex with 10, 20 people, but be prepared of the consequences. So what is my message to ourselves? Let me tell you this. The rule of morality has never changed, because God will never change, will never change.
Yeah.
So please engage in these practices that are immoral, but be ready to suffer the consequences. So my
And the
message
truth about
is,
consequences is
yes,
that they may not necessarily happen to you right now.
Yes, they may
because
not.
I think a
Amazing.
lot of people look around and see, oh, but I'm seeing all these people who've become famous because of selling their bodies, or they're now living large. They're flying off, on holiday internationally. They don't look like they're suffering any consequences. But you then saying it's not necessarily that the consequences will manifest right now, but at some point, every action does have a consequence,
Amazing.
whether it's public or private. There's going to be something that someone will have to deal with, because I think a lot of young people are conflicted because they see a lot of immoral behavior. We're glorifying it in music, we're glorifying it in our videos, in what we watch, and we're not seeing those consequences. So it's very confusing for young people. But maybe you can comment on that as your final word.
If you sow a seed of a plant that eventually will have thorns, you don't see the thorns when the seed just germinates. Probably when it is just a seedling. But ultimately, it may grow into a big tree that has a lot of thorns.
Yeah.
If you are keen to look at those celebrities who are living large today and those who have lived large in the past, you can clearly see some of them today suffering. Some of them have died. We have an unlimited number of examples. So ultimately, one day you will suffer your consequences. And that is why it is very important for us to have a vision and think long-term in terms of our life. Long-term in terms of, for example, I don't want to die young. And I know the kind of habits that would probably shorten my life.
Yeah.
So these celebs sometimes, if we use them as our role models, can be very, very confusing.
Okay.
And it can be lethal in the long term.
Right.
So I think it is very important for us to have a vision of the kind of life that we want.
Absolutely.
In fact, the thing is, one of the biggest challenges that we have today is we are being very worldly. And being worldly means we are conforming to the patterns of the majority in the world. But the truth is that the majority in the world more often are wrong. So we need some personal,
Have your own spine.
Absolutely.
And stand
Absolutely.
for your own
Yes,
values.
yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mbugwa Mumbi, for coming through to the show. I see you have a book there. Maybe you can tell us about it very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Is this a book you've authored?
It's a book here for that. I'm an inspirational author. I've done 4 books.
Okay.
My first and best-selling book is called Excuse Me, Your Dream is Calling You. By the way, I'm a former straight boy, brought up
wow.
in a family with 11 kids, not known
Okay.
my father ever seen. But I started dreaming very early. When in class 5, I dreamt of working in the bank, and I actually became a banker.
Okay.
Then resigned to pursue my own, passion in life.
All right.
Yes.
So how can people get this book, and how can they reach you?
Very good. If I could kindly give my telephone number, 0723942929, 0723942929, sorry. Or you can also go to my Facebook page, Mbugwa Wamumbi, or my website, mbugwamumbi.co.ke.
Okay.
On my YouTube channel, Mbugwa Mumbi TV.
All
You can
right.
which our raw
Great.
materials are.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. Thank you
very
for
much.
coming through.
Thank you,
And
Josh.
guys, be sure to follow him on social media and contact him should you wish to purchase his book. With that said, we need to take a short break now. But coming up next, we're going to be looking at some of the latest fashion trends. This is Full Circle with Joyce. Stay tuned.